Hi, everyone. This is Kevin Sharp, and welcome to another episode of A Page I Love. Today, I'm joined by writer Fabian Nicieza. Fabian, welcome to Comic Art Live, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kevin. Thanks.
We're going back into the Bronze Age to talk about Barry Smith's Conan. Could you tell the viewers before we dive into the page that you chose? Were you a Conan kid? Where would this issue or this character have come into your reading life?
I saw Conan on a newsstand, and I believe the first issue I got was issue number 6. So that was really early in its run. I believe it was bi-monthly at that point. Um, I was not that familiar with the character at all, but I think in the back of my head I'd seen some of the paperbacks on the store shelves because the Frank Frazetta cover reprints were coming out at that time of the original 30s Robert E. Howard stories. To me, it was because Roy Thomas was writing it, and I was a regular reader of Avengers. And Barry Windsor-Smith's art was really eye-catching, and I just was fascinated by the way the whole thing looked. I do remember my brother was frustrated with me for getting it. We didn't get a lot of comics back then, just what our allowance would give us the opportunity for, because we also had to balance, baseball cards and candy and movie tickets and movie theater tickets and all the important stuff that you had to deal with at 10 years old. I'd spin the racks and I'd find things that intrigued me. It's how I discovered Dave Cockrum's work on Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes way before he even came over to Avengers and X-Men work at Marvel. It's how I discovered Jim Starlin's Captain Marvel. Even as a college student, it's how I discovered Frank Miller's Daredevil. So I always was a flipper. Just, oh, that's interesting, and it just interested me. It was something different. I never followed it every month because it was hard to get at the newsstand on a bi-monthly schedule. I started getting it regularly, probably around issue 14 or 15. I think 14, because that's what I have down in my basement. I still have the original issues in my basement. So I know I have 14 all the way through like 43. So through the Barry Smith into John Buscema transition. So I have the original issue that we're talking about this page from in my comics downstairs in the basement.
We're going to actually look at two different versions of this page, and we're going to start with the original. So this is from Conan number 20. When I think of Conan, I imagine a lot of people, if you just say that character, I think of, women and monsters and carnage and glistening muscles. And this page almost gives me more of a Prince Valiant vibe
Yes,
as far
very
as
much. Yeah.
storytelling. So tell us about what was it that of all the Barry Smith choices from this character and this title, how did you land on this one?
I just remember a few seminal moments as a reader when I was a kid, and I wasn't even 11 yet when this issue came out. I was a month away from turning 11, and there are a few moments as a kid that kind of marked a difference in understanding what the potential of the medium could be. Maybe not verbalizing it that way, obviously, but just having a gut feeling that stories can affect you. Stories can create emotional responses in you. My very first time feeling that was when Captain Stacy died in Amazing Spider-Man 91, and I think I was like 9 years old, and I just remember being stunned by that as a kid reading the comic, never believing as I turned the page that he was actually going to die. It'll be fine. Just pull some of the rubble off him, just dust him off. He'll be okay. Um, and when he actually died, it just changed my perspective on what a comic book story can do, and the emotions it can generate in you. To the best of my recollection, this was the second moment in my life when that happened. This page was the culmination of a running subplot, two running subplots. One was Conan's friendship with a character named Fafnir. It was a big, burly, red bearded, red headed guy. Also, Conan had a simmering problem with the commander of the army who he was following, the character on the page, and this brings it to a head. The subplot, in essence, is Fafnir got wounded while they were storming a castle. It was a flaming arrow that hit him in the arm. He fell into the water. He was rescued from the sea. Conan didn't know any of this because he was involved in another engagement at the time, fighting wise. When he got brought back to the boat, when Conan made his way back to the boat, he saw that Fafnir was wounded. and among the wounded, and he had lost his arm. Which that also was a bit of a wow, as a kid. The character lost his arm from the wound, because it had gotten infected from the dirty water that he fell into. At this point here in the story, at the top of the page, Conan's swimming back to the boat because he accomplished the mission or barely survived the mission on the mainland, and he gets back to the boat, and he finds out that all of the wounded were thrown overboard, whether they were actually dead or not. And that includes his friend Fafnir, who's now dead. What amazed me about this page, not only Barry's art, but the methodology of conveying the story narrative. This is Prince Valiant, which I didn't know at the time. I didn't realize at the time. To choose one page to turn into a collage of images with heavy scroll handwritten text on it. Again, a little different than what you normally saw in a comic. It stood out immediately. So the weight of the story moment, the weight of the art, the weight of the writing is actually also mirrored by the composition and difference that the page offers you from what your mainstream regular comic book reading looks like, right? So again, all of these things kind of converge to create that emotion in you. The look on Conan's face in the third collage image is one of the best facial expressions I'd seen to date in a comic book. Almost always, the most excellent facial expressions were incredible snarls and yells from Neil Adams or Jack Kirby, beautiful smiles and glowing eyes from John Romita. Those are the things that always struck out. The beauty and clean line work of Dave Cockrum, where teenage boys and girls all looked like Adonis hunks, and gorgeous beach girls, This was a subtle facial expression on an exhausted guy who's finding out his friend is dead. And you can see it in the image. You just see the weight of the surprise, the disappointment, the pain in Conan's face just from that one little facial expression. And Barry Windsor-Smith was like a bit of a glutton for detail, which was something he developed and evolved into as this series was going along. And you saw it on the printed page. All of a sudden, Sal Buscema really shouldn't be inking him because Sal's line work was a little thicker and a little sort of bolder, and Barry's pencils clearly were starting to need a softer touch. So Dan Adkins started inking them. I think Barry might have inked this issue himself. If I don't remember offhand. It looks like his inking on it. And look at the detail in the hair. Look at not only in Conan's hair, look at the detail in the hair of the guy whose back is to us. You know what I mean? Like all of that stuff just really caught my eye. Later on is when I realized that Hal Foster on Prince Valiant had basically done this methodology of storytelling all the time. But I didn't read Prince Valiant because, quite frankly, it was boring to me as a kid. Even the coloring on this page is very different than what you see in normal coloring. I think Barry colored this issue himself. The amount of white highlights that are used, the skin shading being a completely unexpected skin tone color. All of it is this muted, soft palette, which doesn't really take away from the images. It actually adds to the images because they play so perfectly over the stark white background, and they play so perfectly with the hand lettered, script lettering. I just wasn't expecting it. Now those kinds of things tend to stick with you, especially when it becomes your profession, it becomes your career.
Well, you've teed us up to look at the newer version of the page. Now,
I did that on purpose.
yes. So we'll switch over now. The viewers will see the more, let's call it the more quote unquote modern coloring. Content aside, what jumps out at you?
I'll preface this by saying I don't know who the colorist was on the Dark Horse reprints. I think several were credited, so I don't know who did what or whether it was a studio or what have you. I will say they are professionals who were doing their job, and their job was to color for what the expectations of a modern audience are. for me, it's everything that's wrong with modern coloring today. Um, Simple as that. Okay, end of the show. Thanks, Kevin. It fights the art, it fights the narrative. The lettering becomes really difficult to read. There's no subtlety to it whatsoever. And if anything, everything about the original page by Roy and Barry had subtlety to it. The coloring on the skin tones is over rendered. It's just a mess in every possible way, and it really always amazes me when I see professional color artists now, many of whose work I actually respect quite a bit, are so incapable of allowing the art to tell the story. That they are so incapable of choosing not to overwhelm the black and white line art. There's no separation of foreground, middle ground, background due to the use of the colors that are chosen. You look at Barry's work in that original issue, and every collage image has a clear separation of foreground, middle ground, background. You look at the first one, Conan swimming. The foreground is not overcolored with blue the way it is on the recolored version. The subtlety and softness of the coloring on Conan allows you to clearly see the ship in the background. Look at the ship in the background in the collage image of the recolored version. It's like a brown gray blob, You don't see any of the woodwork lines. You don't see any of the little people on there clearly enough. And like with anything, when you have groups of people coloring something, some pages are going to be better than others. Some panels are going to be better than others. So it's not like the totality of the product is a mess, not in the least. It's just that depending on who's doing it, what their schedule's like, how much time they have, what they're being told they should be doing, and what their own individual inclinations are.
Yeah.
Through all of that grouped together and mushed together, you can easily get something really good, and you could just as easily get something really bad. Having more choices in your palette doesn't necessarily mean you make the right choices. And often having less choices in your palette forces you to make simpler, cleaner choices when you're doing the art.
And in case there's anybody watching who prefers the modern coloring, we'll just say that's why they make chocolate and vanilla.
And I like chocolate and vanilla, quite frankly, but I don't like this colored page. And I do like the original colored
Yes.
page. And my attitude about this has always been everyone is absolutely entitled to their own opinion, no matter how wrong they are.
Let me hit you with the last question that I kind of have to put to each guest here is just in case, do you own any original art from Barry Smith or
No,
Conan in particular?
no. I wish I did. I wish I'd bought more. I wish I'd bought original art when it was more affordable. When I started working at Marvel in the mid '80s and started going to more conventions, there was plenty of art around and available, and I never thought of it. The original art I own is almost all exclusively gifted to me by artists I worked with. I would, at this point, although it's not affordable, I would kill to have a Barry Windsor-Smith page from when he was at his height, when he was inking himself, from the Red Nail story in Savage Tales, or from some of his latter run on Conan.
Well, on that note, let's turn the floor over to you. Please tell the viewers anything with your name on it that we should be on the lookout for.
Well, I always want to pimp my first two novels that I wrote for Putnam Publishing. They are sarcastic suburban mysteries. No tights, no fights, no flights. It is just stupid adults trying to solve a crime. And the first book was called Suburban Dicks, and it was nominated for an Edgar Award by the Mystery Writers of America as best first novel by an American author who wrote it when he was almost 60, and and isn't even from this country. So that's me. The second book, which was a sequel, was called The Self-Made Widow. Prose is where I've been spending a lot more of my attention. I have a Marvel story that just came out a couple months ago, Blood Hunters #4. I did a Silver Surfer story with Patch Zurcher, the artist I've worked with on Cable, Deadpool, and Thunderbolts. I have another anthology story coming out in a few months from Marvel, and it's called Phases of the Moon. I think it's a Moon Knight anthology, and I'm in the process of second draft on a script for that, which is the Moon Knight of 1882 in Alexandria, Egypt, during the bombardment by the British Army of Alexandria. And I have a image book with Kurt Busiek as my co-writer, and Stephen Mooney on art called Free Agents that debuted in July. And it's basically a group of young interdimensional soldiers who've been fighting their entire lives in a ridiculously massive interdimensional war, and they're stranded on Earth now with no way to get back into that war. But they're realizing the war might be coming to them.
All right. Well, that's a good variety of content for people to be on the lookout for. As we go out the door, let me do a quick plug for the channel here. If anybody enjoyed this discussion of Barry Smith's Conan, and you happen to have seen this video but not seen any of the others, you can look for my chat with Jimmy Palmiotti, where we did a different issue from this run, and you can find that on the same YouTube page where this one is located. Thanks again for joining me, Fabian. It was super fun looking at this.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a lot of fun. It was a great idea for a show to do this.